Hello and welcome back, and today I'm going to be giving you my guide to growing tomatoes. And the reason I'm doing this is because I see a lot of people making big mistakes with their tomatoes and they don't get a very good crop because they get quite a lot of blight and rot and things like that in their tomatoes. So that's why I'm doing this today. And if you can hear some pattering of rain on an umbrella, that's because I've got an umbrella over my camera today because it's so wet and I don't want to damage any of my equipment. So the first point I'm going to talk to you about is how to get your plants. So there's two ways you can do this, or three ways actually. You can grow them from cuttings from last year's plants. This can be a bit more tricky because you've got to try and look after them over winter and keep them out of the frost. Or you can also grow them from seed, or you can buy plants from a garden centre. The one that I would recommend is growing from seeds, and this is because growing from seeds is cheaper and you get more satisfaction because you've grown it from a tiny little seed to a proper crop. And to do this, you can sow either in January or February so that your plants are big by the time they can be planted out, or you can plant them in sort of March or April time, ideally April, and this will give them, they'll grow quickly because it's warmer, and then you can plant them straight out maybe a bit later and you'll have a slightly later harvest date. But each way has its benefits and drawbacks. But growing from cuttings is another great way of, say you've got maybe a variety that you can't get seeds for anymore, or you can't buy plants for. Maybe you're going to need to take cuttings from that so that you can use the same variety year after year. And while there are not many pests that attack tomatoes, especially in the UK where they're not as a native species, there are also diseases and fungal infections that you can get. And one of them is blight, and you can also get this in potatoes, and it can be quite devastating to your crop. And what this is when your leaves start to go a bit brown, normally on the end, the tips, and then it moves its way onto the main plant and stalk. And this can either kill off the plant completely or just make your fruits that are on there go brown and mushy, and then eventually they'll just drop off. But another thing is blossom end rot, and I had a problem with this last year on my beefeater tomatoes. And blossom end rot is basically, it can be caused by a infrequent watering schedule. So what this is when you water at infrequent times basically. So if you're going to try and avoid blossom end rot, try and water on a regular basis. So say every morning when you get up you water it, and every evening before you go and settle down for the night you water it as well. And this also comes into watering as well, or feeding and watering, because you need to water before you feed. Just don't give it a good soaking, but you need the soil to be damp, because then it helps the feed get absorbed by the plants. And it also, if you're feeding into a plant that has completely bone dry soil, this can cause blossom end rot. So something else that can cause a lot of confusion is how to grow them, because some varieties like to climb and some others don't. And the main rule of thumb is the cherry tomatoes don't like to climb as much and the others do. So things such as vine tomatoes like to climb, and you can either climb these up a cane or up a wire frame or trellis even. But what a lot of people are starting to do is when they plant their tomatoes, they plant a string, maybe some baler twine, into the ground, and they twist the plant around it as it grows. And this means it self-supports itself and gets stronger stems because of this growing up a string, rather than up a supported cane. Something else people get confused about is whether you should be planting them outside or in a greenhouse or in a windowsill. So it depends. Some varieties do better outside than others. But if you want to try growing them outside, this can be okay, but mainly in the south of the UK. In the rest of the UK it can prove quite a bit of a problem because the weather can sometimes get a bit too wet and cold, and then you get blight like I did last year. And in a greenhouse or a windowsill they can do a lot better and you can give you more fruit because it's heated because it's in your house, and also you're always passing by, so you're always checking the plant and you're always there to be able to water it. But then also you can keep everything constant, so the light will always be the same from the windowsill, the watering will always be the same, and everything will be the same, which means you won't get blossom end rot, and you won't get as many problems as I've been talking about. But in a greenhouse, they're often bigger than windowsills and you can fit a lot more in. Something else you can grow tomatoes in is hanging baskets. If you don't have a good hanging basket, you can make them. For example, reusable shopping bags can be hung from a hook, and they do really well as a hanging basket. And you can also use washing baskets as well that are no longer being used. You can hang these from a hook or a bracket also, and the tomatoes will trail out and you can just pick them as you walk past. Another thing is feeding your tomato plants, and you can either go for organic or non-organic feeds, and obviously these feeding, each feed can be completely different and it's really confusing when you first start out. And you can also make your own feeds. So the organic feeds, the best ones are the seaweed feeds, the seaweed extract. But you can also get non-organic ones which are made in factories, which are also okay to use, but try and go for the organic ones. And making your own feed, you can also get things like comfrey. So if you got comfrey in your garden, you can cut it and soak it in water, strain it off after about a week or two, and then you can dilute this about 1 part fertiliser to 10 parts water in a watering can to feed your plants. And this is a higher in phosphorus and phosphates, which is good for fruiting things like tomatoes and peppers. But then you can also make things out of nettles, which also has high phosphates and potassium, but is more high in nitrogen, which could be bad as it means the tomatoes can put more foliage on and more side shoots than actual fruit. So try not opt for a high potassium and phosphates fertiliser, such as seaweed extract or comfrey fertiliser. Something else that you have to consider when you're growing in a windowsill or a greenhouse, not so much outside, is airflow. And airflow is something, or a lack of airflow, is something that can cause things like blight and blossom end rot. So, for example, to get rid of, or get more airflow in my greenhouse, on hot days I'll open both doors so that the air can run through. And I'll also, when they're bigger, the tomato plants, I remove all of the foliage and leaves up to the first truss of tomatoes, and then I also takes the odd leaf out above that to try and give some space for air to come flow through the greenhouse. And if you're wondering what a truss is a layer of tomatoes or flowers. So what you can do, if you have a short greenhouse like mine, you can have about 3 or 4 trusses in there, and then you pinch the top out of the tomato to stop it growing. But if you want, you can grow them taller outsides, and if you have a taller greenhouse you can grow maybe 7 trusses, but it's completely up to you how much size you've got in your greenhouse. But with mine I'll probably have about 3 or 4 trusses. So I thought I would just tell you about the tomatoes that I'm growing this year. So we've got 3 cherry tomatoes on our decking that are growing up there. But in my greenhouse I've got 3 tomatoes, which is a variety that was the first tomato variety to be named with a Welsh name, which is a Ddraig Goch, which means in English the red dragon, which is also on the flag of Wales. So I've got them in here. I can't really get them out to show you because they're quite big now, and I've got them in these big black sort of felt grow bags. I grew my my courgettes in them last year, and they did really well because they absorb the heat of the summer, the midday sun, and then it sort of dissipates out through the night, I think, and things seem to do well in them. So I've got them growing in there. These are all planted at the same date, but some of them are a lot bigger than others. And I've also got this, which is a money maker. I grew money maker last year, but this one is going to my grandma for her to have in her conservatory. I've also got one money maker out there on the obelisk. So I hope this guide has helped you grow tomatoes, maybe for the first time, or maybe you've been growing them for years but you are struggling to get good harvests. I hope you enjoyed. Please make sure you like, subscribe and comment down below, and if you think any of your friends would benefit from this video, please share it with them. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.